The memorial garden on Outpost Vila sat beneath 3 moons, each casting its own pale shadow across rows of crystalline markers. Ambassador Lyra of the Silcath Collective knelt before the smallest one, her 4-fingered hands trembling as they traced the etched symbols. The grave had been prepared with all the ceremony her people could muster so far from home, but no ritual could fill the void where her daughter should have been. "Myra," she whispered, the name catching in her throat. "My little star." The human technician working on the nearby atmospheric processor pretended not to notice. Tom Rodriguez had seen enough grief in his 8 months on the station to recognize when someone needed privacy. He adjusted his toolkit and tried to focus on the failing pump, but the sound of the ambassador's quiet sobs made the work impossible. 3 weeks earlier, the transport carrying Lyra's family had suffered a catastrophic failure in the nebulous passage. The rescue teams had recovered most of the passengers, but 4 souls had been lost to the void, including 7-year-old Mira. The Silcath mourned differently than humans, with long periods of silent meditation followed by a single day of open grief. Today was that day for Lyra. Tom had been off duty when the distress call came in. While the official rescue ship scrambled, he had taken his personal shuttle, a beaten-up hauler he used for salvage runs. Something about the trajectory calculations had bothered him. The transport had been venting atmosphere in a spiral pattern, and if his math was right, there might have been an escape pod caught in an eddy current that the main scanners had missed. He had been right. The pod had been small, designed for a single juvenile Silcath. Its beacon was damaged, making it nearly invisible to standard sweeps. Tom had found it drifting in the shadow of an ice fragment, its power nearly depleted. Inside, barely conscious and suffering from hypothermia, had been a small figure with iridescent skin and wide, terrified eyes. The child had been alive, but just barely. Tom had wrapped her in thermal blankets and pushed his shuttle's engines beyond safe limits to reach the medical station. The human doctors had never treated a Silcath juvenile before, but they had learned fast. For 6 days, the child had hovered between life and death while the medical team adapted human treatments to her unique biology. Nobody had known who she was at first. The pod's identification system had been corrupted, and the child had been too weak to speak. It had taken 3 days before she could whisper her name. "Myra," she had said, her voice like wind chimes. "I want my mother." Tom had frozen when he heard the name. He had read the casualty reports. He knew Ambassador Lyra had lost a daughter in the accident. But he also knew that the Silcath had already held their mourning ceremonies. The graves had been marked, including one for a child whose body had never been recovered. The station commander had faced an impossible choice. The Silcath grief process was sacred, not to be interrupted once begun. To tell Lyra her daughter lived while she was in the meditation period could cause severe psychological harm, or so the xenopsychology team had warned. Better to wait until the mourning cycle completed, they had said. Better to be certain the child would survive before raising hopes that might be crushed. Tom had disagreed loudly and often, but he was just a technician. His objections had been noted and dismissed. So he had spent the last 3 weeks visiting Mira in the medical bay, reading her stories from Earth and learning ones from her world in return. She had asked about her mother every day, and every day Tom had promised her they would be together soon. He had watched her grow stronger, seen color return to her skin, heard her laugh at his terrible pronunciation of Silcath words. And now he stood in the memorial garden, watching Lyra weep over an empty grave, and something inside him snapped. "Ambassador," he said, stepping forward. Lyra looked up, her large eyes shimmering with tears. The Silcath had no visible pupils, but Tom had learned to read their expressions in the subtle shifts of bioluminescence beneath their skin. Right now, Lyra's grief was a dim, fading light. "Please," she said softly. I need this time. I know, Tom said, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. Nothing matters now, Lyra replied. My daughter is gone. No, Tom said, his voice steady. She's not. Lyra stared at him. The bioluminescence beneath her skin flickered, confusion mixing with something that might have been anger. Do not mock my pain, human. I would never, Tom said. He held out his hand. Please, just come with me. 5 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll leave you in peace and accept whatever punishment you want to give me. Something in his tone must have reached her, because Lyra rose slowly to her feet. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, and thin as a willow branch. She moved like water as she followed Tom through the garden and into the station proper. They walked in silence through corridors, bustling with the evening shift change. Traders from a dozen species nodded to the ambassador as they passed, offering respectful gestures of sympathy. Lyra acknowledged each one with mechanical courtesy, but her attention was fixed on Tom's back. The medical bay was quiet when they arrived. Tom led Lyra past the main ward to a private recovery room at the end of the hall. Through the transparent wall, a small figure sat propped up in bed, watching a holoprojection of something that looked like animated clouds. Lyra stopped walking. That's not possible, she whispered. The child turned at the sound of voices. Her skin brightened immediately, bioluminescence flaring in patterns of joy and recognition. Mama, Myra cried out. Lyra swayed, and Tom caught her elbow to steady her. The ambassador's skin was cycling through colors he had never seen, emotions too complex for his human mind to parse. She took one step forward, then another, moving like someone in a dream. The door slid open. Myra climbed out of bed, trailing monitoring wires, and ran to her mother. Lyra dropped to her knees and gathered the child into her arms, her whole body shaking with sobs that were nothing like the quiet grief Tom had witnessed in the garden. My star, Lyra gasped. My little star, how can you be here? The human found me, Myra said, pressing her face against her mother's shoulder. Tom found me in the dark and brought me home. Lyra looked up at Tom, her eyes blazing with light. You knew? This whole time, you knew she was alive? I found her the day of the accident, Tom admitted. The commanders thought it was better to wait until the mourning period ended before telling you, in case she didn't make it. I disagreed, for what that's worth. 3 weeks, Lyra said, her voice breaking. I have mourned for 3 weeks while she was here, alone and afraid, crying for me. I wasn't alone, Myra said quickly. Tom stayed with me. He read me stories and brought me sweets from the commissary, even though the doctor said he shouldn't. He promised you would come. Lyra stood slowly, still holding Mira against her hip. She crossed to Tom, and before he could react, pressed her forehead against his in the Silcath gesture of profound gratitude. You gave me back the universe, she said. I have no words in any language sufficient to thank you. Just take care of her, Tom said roughly, emotion thick in his throat. That's all the thanks I need. The station commander arrived 10 minutes later, alerted by the medical staff. She began to stammer an explanation, an apology, but Lyra cut her off with a raised hand. I will deal with you and your protocols later, the ambassador said, her voice cold. For now, leave me with my daughter and the human who has more honor in his smallest finger than your entire command staff possesses in their souls. The commander retreated. Tom turned to follow, but Myra called out to him. Don't go, she said. You're part of this story now. You have to stay so Mama can hear it all. So Tom sat on the edge of the medical bed and told Lyra everything. The eddy current he had calculated, the damaged beacon, the desperate flight back to the station. Myra filled in the gaps with her own memories of cold and fear and waking up to find a strange, human wrapping her in blankets that smelled like engine oil and promising everything would be all right. When the tale was finished, Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "Humans are strange," she finally said. "You are loud and chaotic, and you break things as often as you fix them. But you also do impossible things because you believe they should be possible. You run toward danger when wisdom says to run away. You hold on when letting go would be easier." "We're stubborn," Tom agreed with a small smile. "You are magnificent," Lyra corrected. "And I will make sure every world in the collective knows what you did. I will tell them that when my daughter was lost in the dark, it was a human who brought her home." Later, after Tom had finally left them to rest, he walked back through the memorial garden. The grave marker with Mira's name still stood beneath the 3 moons, but tomorrow it would be removed. Tomorrow there would be a celebration instead of mourning. Tom thought about the human tendency toward stubbornness, toward refusing to accept loss when action remained possible. Maybe that was what made humanity fit into the wider galaxy. They weren't the strongest, or the smartest, or the oldest species among the stars. But they were the ones who went back into the dark looking for lost children. And sometimes that made all the difference.